Welcome back to Texas Sawdust, everybody. This week we are taking a break from the kitchen cabinets and we are diving into a new project. My uncle came into town and he's been woodworking longer than I have, and we decided that we wanted to try making our very first interior door. So let's dive in. Now, as we dive into this, I want to put a caveat on this quote unquote 3-tool door. That is only true if you buy pre-milled lumber. I bought raw lumber, so I need a jointer and a planer in addition to a chop saw, table saw, and a router. That makes this a 5-tool project, but it's still very simple. The majority of it's done on a table saw. For me, first step was breaking down all the lumber, getting it cut to size, getting it jointed. This one board I'm working on here weighed probably 100 to 110 pounds, and it caused quite a bit of an issue. Right now I'm face jointing this smaller board, but tried moving on to the bigger board, and it had such a big bow on it and was just giving me all kinds of fits. I finally decided this isn't working. I'll take it over to the bandsaw. But of course I don't have the right blade, and it was getting all squirrely on me, cutting at all kinds of weird angles. I flipped it around, finally got it cut in half, but you'll see soon how this is going to cause me some problems. Once I had it cut in half, got it on the joiner, then was able to run all the rest of my lumber through the planer. Here I'm cutting everything down to final width. And the board coming up right here, you'll see it's not getting cut by the table saw because it got all jacked up. So had to redo that one. I like to get everything nice and squared up before trimming it to length. If you're cutting the top and bottom, I like to cut them at the same time so they're exactly the same length. At this point, everything's cut to size and length. Take it over the table saw. You can start cutting your mortises. I did that with a dado stack, and I set it up so that I could run it through one way, flip it 180, and then run it back through, and that made sure my mortise was exactly in the center. The sides each get a mortise all the way through. The top, bottom, both get a mortise on one side all the way through, and the center actually gets a mortise on the top and the bottom because it'll have panels going into both sides. Here you just saw how I flipped the board to make sure that the groove ends up exactly in the center. This is actually the bottom. It was quite a large piece to run through like this. I think if I was going to do this again, I'd put a nice additional fence on there. For the stiles, on the top and the bottom, you need to cut the mortises deeper to accept the tenons. So that's what I was doing there. Here I'm cutting the tenons of the top, bottom, and middle. I cut the center one shorter so that it would just fit into the normal mortises on the stiles, but that was not the right move. What I should have done is cut all three, top, middle, and bottom to the same length, and then after the tenons were made, then go back and just cut the tenons shorter on the center one, because I had a bit of trouble trying to get everything straightened out. In addition, I should have made that bottom mortise longer, so I had to cut that tenon down. After that, it was time to get the center panels ready. That's made with a bunch of smaller pieces that are all going to be tongue and grooved together. I like to cut down all of my lumber, and that way I can maximize the thickness if there's any warping or anything. When I joint it, that warping or inaccuracy gets reduced. Here I am just jointing one face of all of the boards, getting them ready to take over the table saw and cut to width. The next step is to run all the boards through the table saw and get them all cut to the exact same width, except for the left and right sides. Those are longer so that they slide under and into the mortises, but appear to be the same width as everything else. Then it's on to cutting the mortises with the dado stack. This is done the same way as the stiles of the door. And then I moved the fence slightly so that when I ran it through, I was cutting the edge of the boards off, leaving a tongue, creating the tongue and groove on these. Here I accidentally wasn't paying attention, and while trying to create the tongue, I cut off the mortise instead. At this point, I put a small chamfer on everything, but I was having a little bit of an issue with tear out. So rather than conventional cutting, I was running these through the router table backwards, doing a climb cut. You got to be careful with that, but it did leave a better cut and did not cause chip out. After that, it was just time to set up the miter saw and cut everything to equal length and move on to assembly. When assembling these, I put some spacers in here. This will make room for expansion. Since this was just a dry fit, I wasn't overly worried about getting everything perfectly set up. My goal was just to make sure everything went together, because once you add glue, your time to fix any issues is long past. So I like to dry fit all of my projects before I move on to gluing anything. Here is the perfect example of why I dry fit everything. I was trying to fit the other style on, and the center was just giving me fits, and I could not figure out what was going on. It did not want to go in there. I finally said, oh, well, trying to get everything lined up, it's giving me trouble. So I grabbed a razor blade real quick and just put a small chamfer on there so that it would kind of slide right into the mortise. Still didn't want to go in, so I said, all right, well, I'll force it in. And that's when I realized I had that center style backwards. One of my mortises was a little looser than the other one, and I flipped that around during dry assembly and cracked the board. I actually cut that tenon thicker so that it would hold tightly in there, but after I dry assembled everything, it was on to sanding. I like to sand with 80, then 120, and finally 180 grit, running everything through, especially all of the center panels that are much more difficult to sand after assembly. Once everything was sanded, it was on to final assembly. Because I was having so many issues with my spacers staying in place during the dry assembly, I decided to just super glue them all in place so I wouldn't have problems while I was dealing with trying to get everything glued up and rushing. And me and my uncle are assembling this together. It definitely helped having a second person on a glue up like this. There's a lot of pieces that all fit together. I did not glue together the center tongue and groove panels. I'll find out later if that's going to come back and bite me. I just don't want them rattling, but the spacer should help alleviate any of that rattling. Right now, the pieces fit snugly with room for wood movement, so I think it'll be all right. Once I had all the panels in there, it was time to put the final style on, and then it was just a little bit of cleanup and getting everything fit exactly so that it all lined up correctly, and tighten down the clamps, wipe everything down. And I'm actually very happy with how this turned out. I think the glue up with two people was an extreme help. It could definitely be done by yourself, but was definitely easier with two. This is where we're going to end part one. The door is completely assembled, glued up. It still needs hardware holes. It needs to be routed out for hinges, lots of sanding and finishing. But I absolutely love the way it turned out. This is just how I imagined it. Individual panels, tongue and groove together, chamfers on all the sides that will create V grooves in the door. It looks absolutely gorgeous, and I'm super excited. Now, in part two, we're going to pick back up on this in the future. We're going to make the door frame that this is going to go into, as well as the trim. And so I look forward to seeing you guys there. Please like and subscribe if you think I earned it, and we'll see you later. Until next time, get out to the shop.
Ah,
What do I want to say? That is the question.